Oh, there we are.
Oh, good work. There's a container here. Cool.
I had to say no to the espresso much because I was right at my scooter hut. Oh, yeah, it was nice.
Well, he was more talking about it's not but just like how it practically does actually achieve. Yeah, I thought it was very clear. And then I was trying to write a sort of one page introduction to what my big view was, sort of getting to the paragraph. Well, yeah, we know all this about civilization, but there's this gap here. And I'm like, well, I can tell you about lots of gaps. We can't quite tell you about just one gap. In general, I'm still working out the problem build but I'm not actually solving that. Oh, no.
To me, it's not when I see your stuff, it's more like it's provided with vocabulary.
Yeah, so my new idea that I'm planning on is to say that visualization are a type of language. People said that people in the past have focused on kind of working out grammar of the language, the syntax of it, and all of my work how the visualization means. The really interesting thing that what visualization does is actually lets you kind of build a scaffold, I guess, so that you can find meaning in kind of small elements, and then abstracting the visualization, you get all these other things, you get all this other relationships, and then social media company. It's a little bit. I won't be happy with French
that? Where's my video?
So what makes
Should,
good
301. So the one that married to
really neat things that I've been saying organisation needs to do. So I can no,
I teach like artificial methods on
but have said
classes.
visualization needs to be
Yeah, we're at 10 plus 6. I've done one.
And then that gives me a reason to say why I was good.
So you have been training her? That's really good. Take your own.
You still are playing for amazing scripts.
Just went to this guy to do this master's thesis review talk. The thesis review talk was itself way overdue, and then he was still saying, "Well, like kind of, I'd like to do research, but I'm 2.5 months overdue." Yeah, I was like, "Oh my god, dude, just make the decisions now, right?" Stop saying things like that. Yeah, you do.
So you guys like actually you need to talk to Lydia about structure as well, right?
Do I?
No, because Lydia's going through the heading out. That's level 2. Level 2 heading out.
Yeah. Like, I was just telling her about this idea that might be very well like very hard. It's trying to define what my gap is. Because I'm pretty sure what I want to do, but I just don't define the gap is. But it fits in there. And I realised that it all fits into the head. Language, semantics, visualization. And there's a lot of work done on syntax and visual graphics. There's not much done.
Or composition, like, I guess there's an analogy to be made between a lot of it, like about how like language works in terms of grammar, syntax, composition, readability, like all that. It's a beautiful thing, isn't it? I like it. In some ways, you think about visualization in terms of like not as terms of understanding your own what is analogous to makes sense because you have visual stuff, right?
Exactly, right.
Yeah.
And even specifically, I'm looking, you know, the graph maps with stuff. You look at what they actually are, you just in terms of ability standing around the open, they kind of except the one I don't have it, this quality to basically is it true and accurate, which is something that is you never that's such a given concern. Like others post so visualization a conversation.
Break down to looking at visualization for analysis.
I don't think it does. What I want to say, this is why I think it's really good. But I think what's different about visualization, so in a lot of ways visualization is like what's different about visualization and visual now is that you've got a lot of freedom of what you make. It's way more than and
has that always been the case?
no, so there's some so the figurative visualization is an example that's much closer to that. Even the graphic visualization together supposedly completely prove it actually right, so then you get the other feature is that you've got this generation of features. And then you've got this so what I'm thinking say is that this class visualization lets you do sort of semantic scaffolding where you can work with
Yeah.
So we're getting some idea and it's like what?
No, it's cool. It's cool. I like it. I would say just take it further. It's interesting. And I think it's just, you've got to think of it definitely within every analogy, how does it serve, how is it basic story? Like you can compare anything to anything but where it proves useful, where it provides you something, a good way of thinking about it. So what is it that analogy affords you in terms of what you're achieving? No, that's cool. And she really thought I was going
What is it? The mix?
Oh, so Angus,
You apply these phrases.
sorry, I've got like also like just grab them and just go, have they collected data in a good way, in a correct way, in an excellent way, tick box, have they managed to get into like an answer, yes or no, have they managed to get something out, which is like at least somewhat
So when do you use it?
this Friday. We get it back to a week. Probably a week. Yeah. Aim for a week. We'll start to settle it through. That'll be fine. That's right,
Oh my god, did you see that? Yeah. Because I want to remember the experience of going to Naples. I want to remember how funny Chile was. So I want to remember some yeah, he came to that.
Yeah.
Oh, no, it's not a phone. It's a...
No. This is a device. It's an actual camera, and it's got all the correction for the spherical aberration on the front of that. So yeah. Sorry, I wasn't waving. It's a little 360 camera. Wait to everyone watching at home.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, so no, it's awesome, and it just streams out.
A couple of minutes, so if you need a top up or anything before we get going, now's the time to get another drink.
Yeah.
PA might work this week, let's see.
The slides speak.
We probably don't need to, well, let's use it anyway. Hello everyone, welcome. Thank you for coming along again to, some of you again, and welcome to the first timers to Hacked Hackers Brisbane. Tonight we've got Angus Veach, but we'll get to that in a little bit. I'll just do a little bit of an intro beforehand. So if you haven't been to Hackers before or you don't know what it is, it's an international organisation that started in New York, and there are chapters all over the world, and it's basically a group of meetups that come together to talk about how the nexus of technology and journalism or storytelling can kind of, technologists and storytellers can work together to create new forms and do new and interesting things. So that's what we're talking about, all forms of storytelling, different types of technology. This week we're talking about sort of more probably the input side of the storytelling, I think, than the output side, but it'll cover both depending on the month you show up. How can you get involved? It's definitely a community organisation that we're trying to run here. So the more people who are interested and involved, the better. You could volunteer, help out at the door, like Colin's doing tonight. Thank you, Colin. Or you could present, which would be great. We're always looking for new presenters. We've got one lined up for next month, but the month after, in June, it'd be great to find a presenter. Provide support in some other way. Maybe you can bring along a bottle of wine like Caroline did tonight, thank you. And maybe you can put some sponsorship up or participate online. We've got a few online communities, which we should talk about now. Twitter, if you're tweeting tonight, that's our hashtag, and if you're just looking for someone to talk to during the week or during the month when we're not actually having a meetup, I'm at the other end of that, so feel free to tweet at me. We've also got a Slack community group, which you can find at the address on screen there. I thought I'd actually just show you quickly. We're getting quite a few people there, and it's quite a lively discussion now. Most days of the week we've got plenty to talk about. We talk about all sorts of things, a bunch of different topic channels over there as well. There's one for the Oz election at the moment where we're always talking about data and where to get it and why Australia Post is withholding their postcode lists, among other things. Next month, I'm really excited next month actually to have Luke Bacon from the Open Australia Foundation coming to talk to us. Luke's one of 2 paid employees at the Open Australia Foundation, and if you haven't heard of them, they're a really great group of people, mostly volunteers. The Open Australia website is the main project of theirs where they've made Hansard computer readable, basically, so it's much easier to search and use and analyse Hansard than it ever was before. They've got a bunch of other projects, and the one that Luke's going to be talking to us about is one called morph.io, which is about scraping data off websites, which if you've ever tried to get data out of government or big business can be a really useful skill to have. Sponsors, I really want to thank our sponsors. We've got 3 sponsors now, and that's really great. Hub 411 has come on for the first time this month. They're a local group of businesses around the 411 postcode and trying to encourage technology and innovation in the 411 area. Really great to have their support as an event support sponsor. Thank you very much to the ABC as always for the venue. Really great to have their support as well. And ThoughtWorks tonight are providing your food and drink, so big thank you to ThoughtWorks as well. Now, Angus, by way of introduction, do you want to do it?
Yeah. So Angus is a PhD student at the University of Queensland in the School of Communication and Arts. His thesis is looking at methods that you can use to analyse large volumes of textual data, and particularly looking at when that textual data comes from multiple different sources. So, potentially looking at when you've got public organisations, scientific bodies, governments, other kinds of vested interests around an issue, how you actually can take all of that information and make sense of it through some kind of computational method. So I'm not going to steal too much of Angus's thunder, but he's going to talk to us about coal seam gas, is that right? As a particular issue, and some of his analysis with that. So Angus, welcome.
Do we need this? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Tell me if you can't. Okay. So, what have we got here?
Sorry, take your time, Angus.
Yeah.
No pressure.
Yeah. You got all night, yeah?
Staring respectively.
No one needs dinner. Yep. Okay, thank you. I'll start off by saying that if I was a bit more honest, my title might be "What Have I Done with 20,000 News Articles?" Because, as I'm sure you won't be surprised to hear, I'm basically going to be sharing some of the things that I've done in doing my PhD, which is all about how we can use computational methods of analysing text to understand public discourse in contentious issues. As Dan said, when you've got multiple voices talking about something, my rationale is that there's so much text out there on the internet. People are articulating their views in press releases and blogs. You've got news organisations reporting it. You've got discussions on social media. All this text, there's far too much to read, but using computational tools, can we help to make some sense of it? I'll be talking less about the sociological side of things tonight than the technical side. I'm going to share some methods that I've used myself and show you what they do. And I've borrowed this title from an article by someone called Gregory Crane, a digital humanities scholar, who asked the similar question about books. What do you do with 1 million books? He asked this back in 2006 when there was a project called the Million Books Project that started up. These days we have Google Books, which has even more in it. But they're saying, well, we've got all this data archived. What can you do with it? You can't read it. Well, not one person anyway. So what do? One popular response is to not read it, not read them. That doesn't mean ignore them though. It means find something else that can read it for you, like a computer. And see if a computer can dig out some useful, meaningful patterns, features, trends, whatever, from this information. I'll qualify it though and say don't read many of these articles or books, because you still need to read some of them to have any idea of what's going on. You need contextual information to interpret your computer extracted data. And that's the tension between close reading and distant reading. Close reading is the traditional form of reading. Distant reading is using a computer to sort of infer things from the sum total of what you've got. And I'll talk through two methods tonight of not reading your data. One is named entity extraction or named entity recognition. The other is topic modelling. And these methods tend to depend on fairly sophisticated algorithms that if you really want to understand, you need to be an adept mathematician or statistician or coder. But I want you to take heart in the fact that although I've got some technical aptitude, I'm not trained in computer science or mathematics, and I've managed to plod along with this stuff. When it comes to being a hacker, I'm something of a hack, you could say. And so these methods might not be for everyone, and they might not always be what you need, but they might be more accessible than you think. So, as Dan said, I'm talking about coal seam gas. That's because it's my case study as a contentious issue that there's been lots talked about. It's an explosive gas in more ways than one. Now, I'm going to be looking at lots of different sources for my thesis, but the central collection that I've got is a bunch of articles from the online news database Factiva. It's a database that you'll need a subscription to use. I've gone through the UQ library to get it, but they have a pretty exhaustive collection of news from all around the world. Problem is, in order to do any computational analysis, you need to package your data into a form that your computer can read it. With the Factiva data, that wasn't exactly convenient. A lot of websites, especially commercial ones, won't let you just download their data in one big hit. That would be selling their product essentially to you. So what I had to do was put in my search term. I was looking for pretty much anything about coal seam gas in Australia. It gave me about 40,000 hits. I had to download the 100 at a time in HTML format, then convert them with a tool supplied by Dan to a machine-readable CSV format, basically a table. So from that form to that form, I ended up with a CSV file of plain text about 100 megabytes big, which is pretty big for straight up text. Once I'd filtered the irrelevant articles out, I had about 26,000 of them. But the key point is that they're structured. So we've got the text in there, but we've also got a date for every article, we've got a unique ID for every article, and we've got other metadata as well. Okay. In terms of sheer volume of my collection, that's what it looks like. So without even knowing what is in the content of this news, we can already see that there's some sort of story to be told. Something very different started to happen after about 2007-8 than what was happening before it. Now, I know a bit about what happened because I've been working in this sector in government and university for some time. Before 2007, there was a CSG industry. There might not have been any news about it, but it was there. It was just happening in central Queensland where no one really knew about it, and it was very small scale. That all changed in 2007 when the gas companies realised they could liquefy their gas, send it to Gladstone and export it to Asia. And that opened up a whole new market for them, and that's partly why the gas industry became so big. Something else happened in 2011, and that's what we'll get to a bit later, but that's when the public really caught on and this became a really contentious issue. We might look at those little spots as well later. So, you want to know more than just how much news you've got, you want to know what's in it. And the first method I tried was named entity extraction. What I got the computer to do was to find every location, every place name in my data. And the reason I did this is because CSG is a very geographically specific issue. The physical reality of pulling gas out of the ground changes depending on where you are, as does the social environment in which you're in. So you can't really make sense of this issue unless you know which areas are being talked about and how that's changing. So in technical terms, named entity extraction works like this. You've got your data, you've got your computer, and it sucks up the names. It's a bit more complicated than that. There's sort of two main methods that you can use. One is to get a dictionary or a list of all the place names you're interested in, or the people names or organisations. Give that to your computer and it can find them in your text. A slightly more sophisticated method, or a much more sophisticated method, is to use an algorithm that finds names on the basis of their grammatical context. So it finds maybe a word or two that's got capitals and it's got certain words before or after it. I opted for the dictionary approach, partly because I'd learned enough new things that week, partly because I found a dictionary that had all the names I could ever want in it. There is a gazette maintained by Geoscience Australia that contains every place name in Australia, about 375,000 of them. So I know that would have the places I'm interested in it, but it also has geographic coordinates for every one. So once you tag those places in your text, you can map the results, which I'm always very keen to do. So to do all this, I used a program called KNIME. I don't know how well known this one is. I happened to find it while Googling when I started my thesis. It's an open source data mining platform developed by the University of Constance. It's based on Eclipse, if that means anything to any computer folk in the audience. But the beauty of it is that you can construct analytical workflows, not by scripting them or coding them, but by dragging and dropping little nodes or modules. So the beauty of it is there's no barrier between conception and execution. If you can think of what you want to do with your data and find a node for it, and there's a huge library in there, then you can just string them together. The input of one becomes the output of another. And so this is great for me, not having learnt programming or R. It's a very common data analysis program. I could get up to speed and learn how this stuff worked without having to learn to code or to script or to learn command names, for example. So if you're interested in starting with data analysis, that's a good place to start. What we're looking at is a simplified version of my workflow to tag the place names in my data and to link that back up to the Gazette with the coordinates in it. Some of these things are, does this work? Yep. Self-explanatory. The dictionary tagger takes information from your dictionary, finds it in the documents and tags them. Bag of words creator. Most or many text processing techniques these days, they don't like to work with strings of words that we humans read. They turn the text into unordered bags of words. Just a bunch of bags of words, then they can count them much more easily, which is what the term frequency node does. You've got a document vector there. That means you turn your data into a table where you've got every document and every term. How many times does every term appear in the document? The rest of them manipulate the data to get it into a form I can load into other software. And I loaded it into ArcMap, which is part of the ArcGIS platform, a very popular GIS platform. But I also managed to do the same thing with Tableau, which is a very accessible and popular InfoViz program. What we're looking at is every place mentioned in my data in the entire period. It makes a lot more sense when we resize each location by the number of times it's mentioned. So, lo and behold, we've got Gladstone is very prominent because that's where all the gas was being sent to be exported. If I hit forward a bit, these blue areas are CSG wells. So the places that are most talked about tend to coincide with the CSG wells. So I know that this is working pretty well. Although interestingly, not all gas fields have coverage. So you start to ask why are some places talked about more than others. Bringing in the temporal dimension, this shows what was talked about, or the places covered in the news between 2000 and 2007. Not much, and it's all mostly in Queensland. Post-2007, we've got a lot more happening in the Surat Basin area, the Western Downs in Queensland, and Gladstone. 2011-12, New South Wales discovers coal seam gas, or metaphorically speaking. It becomes news. 2013 to 2015, not so much in Queensland, or is decreasing, but it's still staying strong in New South Wales. So just by counting the names in the documents, you can build up a picture of what areas the news is focusing on. I made a video of this too, just for sort of curiosity. You can find that on my blog if you like, but I'm not doing it again because ArcMap's video capabilities are pretty terrible. So that's counting names. That's relatively simple, or names are relatively simple things. But what if you want to know about the thematic content of your documents? That's where topic modelling comes in. So it's more sophisticated than named entity extraction in that it works like this instead. It's magic. That's how it feels like it's working anyway when you use it. But before explaining the mechanics of it, we need to think about what even is a topic. And that's a serious question. What is a topic? In the world of text processing in computers, a topic is not a single word, but a collection of words that all relate to each other somehow, tend to travel together in the text. They don't all need to be present in order to determine that a topic is present. So if you saw these words, steering, wheel, engine, road, drawers, it's not a big leap of imagination to figure we might be talking about a car. And so if you wanted to, you could define these words, or some combination of these words appearing in your text as representing the concept car. The interesting fact is, words that are semantically related tend to travel together in text. If you see one of these words, you're more likely to see one of the others. And it's this phenomenon of co-occurrence that topic modelling exploits to automatically identify topics. So even without giving it a dictionary or any other information, you can throw a bunch of text at a computer and it can deduce sets of words that, more times often than not, represent topics, coherent topics. And of course, some words can travel in multiple topics at once. So these words in the middle might travel with those words as well, in which case they're probably part of a topic you might call train. Again, topic modelling can work with these fuzzy boundaries. The way topic models work varies from one to the next. I'll explain two different approaches briefly and compare them later on. One is the approach used by Leximancer, which you may have heard of. It was developed by someone called Andrew Smith at UQ some years back. I believe it was used to create the Abbott quiz. Is that correct?
That's correct.
The Abbott election quiz, which was on ABC News a few years ago. I couldn't find it. If it's still there, Google can't see it and ABC can't see it. Or maybe I wasn't searching for the right thing. Anyway, this is my unofficial explanation of how Leximancer works. To me, it works, it's a grounded approach. It works from the bottom up. It takes your data, it looks for prominent keywords, then it looks at the context of those words to see what words co-occur with the word that you found or it found. And it uses those as evidence terms for the concept. So when a certain number of those words appear, we can say we're talking about a car. It takes another step further and say which concepts co-occur with other concepts. And you can find clusters of concepts and call them themes. So a car might be part of a transport theme. So that's got a fairly intuitive logic to it. And it works pretty well. You apply this to your text and meaningful things pop out. The beauty of Leximancer is that it's all designed in a single user interface without any expertise. You can get something out of it. Perhaps the downside is that it's proprietary software, whereas most of the other recent topic modelling algorithms tend to be open source. When you hear topic modelling these days, we're more often talking about what sort of a class of probabilistic models. And they work, instead of from the ground up, I think of them as working from the top down, in that they make certain assumptions about how your documents might have come into being, how they were generated, and it works backwards to figure out what the topics might be. So behind your documents it says, oh, I think there's a certain number of topics, hidden variables or latent variables. And they're mixed together in a certain way to produce each document. And the number of topics and the way that they're mixed, these are parameters set by the model and the user. And it gets even more complicated because behind each topic is a mixture of words. And these are also controlled by the model. How are words mixed together in what proportions to make topics? This is what they call a generative model. This whole approach works by assuming that documents come into being in this way. So the only observed data is your document. The magic of topic modelling then is an algorithm that repeats its calculations to figure out what sets of words would make this model work. So if documents were made this way, what words would result in your documents? And that's what we call a fitted model. And often, or usually, these sets of words are very interpretable. They pop out and say, well, that's obviously about this, that's about that. The most popular form of topic modelling is called latent Dirichlet allocation, or LDA. You don't need to know much about that. The Dirichlet bit is about the mathematical distribution that it uses. I've been using it in KNIME and in R. You can also use it in other platforms, and it works wonderfully well. The downside is that the mechanics of all this are quite complicated. It's a bit like a black box. And that's a problem because the user actually has to set parameters and tell it things about how many topics there are, for example. And what you put in affects what you get out. And that's a bit embarrassing if you're using these things as a social scientist, for example, to be more empirical or objective or replicable in what you do. So that's something I'm coming to terms with. Okay, but the first thing I did with LDA was not apply it to my content, my thematic content, but to those entities that I extracted earlier, the place names. I had about 1,000 odd place names, and surely there's some rationale, way of rationalising them. So I used LDA to find groupings. Do these things get it on? And the answer is yes. So I reduced my documents to just lists of place names, applied it to the topic model, and it found groupings of places that are co-occurred in the text. So this is a visual representation of what topic modelling does with semantic words, with other words. So this particular cluster corresponds to many of the gas fields in the Western Downs in Queensland, the Surat Basin. And using the outputs of the model, you can chart the prominence of this cluster over time. And these little spikes early on are mostly noise because there weren't many documents at that point. So if you don't have much data, you're likely to get noise out of this sort of system. But what happened afterwards is meaningful. After 2007, when the LNG projects were announced, this area spikes because that's where the gas is coming from. Another spike in 2011 when the public debate started happening. By 2012, this interest had waned. Most of these gas projects were all underway by then. The deals had been done. No longer news. Found another cluster in the Wide Bay region between Bundaberg and Maryborough. I didn't even know there was gas prospecting there, but it turns out there is. Although no one talked about it much except for before the Queensland election. Another cluster down in the Liverpool Plains in New South Wales, where the spike was in about 2011, 2012. The Northern Rivers region, Lismore, Byron Bay. Things didn't pick up there until 2012-13. And you'll notice that it found about 4 different clusters just in that one region that were quite distinct. They overlap, but they're distinct, just like real concepts or topics. And so on. There was actually gas production happening in Sydney from 2001. Not many people seem to know that. These are what some actual topics look like. So this is a 40 topic model. 40 just seemed to be a good number that worked. I can't really justify it any other way. And this is applied to my whole corpus of 26,000 articles. And I don't know about you, but I think these are pretty coherent lists of words. That first one, carbon emissions, renewable, wind-fired, greenhouse, climate change. It's clearly about energy production and carbon impacts. The next one is about, in my reading, these LNG projects, a train of LNG factories, they call it. Got deals, ventures. These are about partnerships between the global companies and the local gas producers. Waste, salt, treatment, ponds, water. That's about surface water management. The next one's about groundwater impacts, fracking, and so on. So this is pretty convincing stuff to me when I'm using this. It's like, wow, it finds coherent topics. What do you do with them? That's showing our original volume of content with all the themes in it. That's not very meaningful. It could be if it was smaller, fewer topics, but it's better to stretch it out. So this shows a normalised version of that stacked graph. So for all of the news coverage in any given period, this shows the share of each topic. And we can see at a glance that not only did the coverage rise dramatically in this period, but the content of the coverage shifted dramatically. We've got certain topics that previously dominated the coverage shrink down, and these topics, which were previously small, become more dominant. To see at a broad level what these topics were, I tried an experiment and ran the same model with only 6 topics in it instead of 40. And I've labelled them here with my reading of what those topics meant based on their words. And so early on we had lots of talk about energy markets and projects, business investments, shares, economic and business stuff essentially. Whereas the topics that became more prominent are about water, environment, protests, community, politics and policy. Now the interesting thing is, in doing this, I basically replicated something that Dan had done a few years ago with another colleague, Libby Mitchell. He used Leximancer to analyse a similar data set, not the same, but similar, and came up with 6 themes that are not unlike the ones I found. The shift here isn't quite as dramatic. I'm not sure why that is, but he labelled his water and environment, people and protest, energy and economy, investment, infrastructure. These are similar, but not the same, but similar enough to mine that it's quite heartening to know that you get similar results with very, very different techniques. So back to this graph. We looked at these spikes in coverage earlier. And when you see it with this graph, you can see they coincide with just a few other topics that spike at the same time. This is the same part of the graph zoomed in. So I looked at those topics and thought, what are they about? This first one's about mining, residential zones, exclusion. It's essentially about the debate around excluding mining or CSG mining from residential areas in New South Wales. The second one's about protests, blockades and arrests. So clearly what was driving the news at that point will probably relate to those two themes. This other spike corresponds with a very clear jump in this red topic here. First 5 terms of that are election, party, candidate, vote, seat. This is about an election, and that's exactly when the New South Wales election was held, or the lead up to it. So obviously it was a big important issue in that election, or vice versa. The election was important in the coverage of coal seam gas. And there's 2 other spots where that topic peaks up. I wonder what they could be. So here's the elections theme on its own. This is showing its relative contribution to the overall coverage. And a bit like I said before, we had a coal seam gas industry before 2007, but it wasn't in the news. We had elections before 2010, but they weren't, you know that, they weren't in the news about coal seam gas. Until, this is the Queensland election happened right there, the federal election happened right there, and the New South Wales election happened there. So in each of these elections, coal seam gas seemed to be becoming even more important, or again, vice versa, depends how you look at it. I figured out that little bump there was the previous federal election, but not much happening. Some other topics over time. This is the one about LNG projects. They peak in 2009. By 2012, we've lost interest in the projects themselves, or at least the ones in Queensland.
Sorry,
Yep.
what does your y-axis represent?
Oh, sorry. That is essentially the percentage of percentage of what? It's the prominence of each topic divided by the number of articles. So it's a measure that represents the contribution of this topic to the overall coverage or the overall text. So even if the coverage is shooting up, it accounts for that and normalises it. So, and it is actually a fairly meaningful percentage out of the data you get. So this project shoots up to 0.14, whereas the election project topic is about, the peak is about the same. Groundwater impacts and fracking. I mentioned noise earlier. These, I looked up what was driving these mentions of the topics, and that was when the industry was in its exploratory phase. You had lots of articles talking about drilling wells and pumping water out, but none of them were really about groundwater impacts or fracking. But because there wasn't much data there, and because these topics were defined using the rest of the data set, it results in this sort of false positive. So it's something to look out for when you do this sort of thing. Really, I think I've got 2 different data sets. I've got one before 2008 and one after, and they probably should be analysed separately. That's what's going on there. It wasn't until 2010 that interest in groundwater impacts shot up dramatically. I'm not quite sure what triggered it, but it happened at the same time that the Queensland government got its act together. I was there when it happened. Fracking. That peaked at about the same time that the movie Gasland opened in Australia. No surprise there. It was all about fracking, and it's kind of what brought that issue to the fore in Australia. Compared to groundwater management or groundwater impacts, surface water management was talked about much earlier, and this isn't noise. This is because back in the mid-2000s, there was a lot of towns in drought, and they wanted to get their hands on the water that the gas companies were pulling out of the ground. So this is actual representation of the issue. And this peak here coincides with the spill in the Pilliga forest that Santos presided over, which caused a lot of news. So again, it shows that these topics measure up with reality. This one's interesting because the topic model distinguished between orderly protests, marches, rallies, and blockades. The key words being things like police arrests, blockade, as opposed to marches and rallies. The first peak in the blockade topic corresponds with soon after the beginning of the Lock the Gate campaign. That was when Drew Hutton finally got the community mobilised and organised essentially against this issue. It was a blockade at Tara in south central Queensland. Steve Irwin got arrested, plenty of news there. The next peak coincides with the blockade in New South Wales against Metgasco. The next, the Battle of Bentley, it was called, and then one at Gloucester. So what these peaks sort of allow me to do in coming to terms with what I'm looking at is to zero in on the key events. It's one way of finding the key events in your data. So what happened there? Oh, okay. So it's a way of targeting what you read, I suppose. That's one way of looking at it. Looking at the protests theme, we've got a bunch of protests in the Northern Rivers, Lismore region coincided with that spike. This one coincided with a big highway protest, it turns out, where they covered about 2,000 kilometres of highway with regular banners. So that's the substance I've got to show you. In conclusion, I think I'm convinced at least that these two techniques, named entity extraction and topic modelling, are useful ways of not reading large amounts of text. You can get meaningful information out of it without reading it all. I think that's proven. Topic modelling, especially, is an evolving world unto itself. It's an expanding frontier, and it's kind of terrifying for someone like me coming into it. There's so many different topic models. There's ones that are designed for correlated topics, ones that are designed for topics changing over time, ones that are designed for associating topics with authors, which might be interesting for me. It's a complicated little world, but it comes with a learning curve. The other thing that I've found time and again, computers do this stuff quickly, but you've got to feed them the right thing. So, good example, when I threw that dictionary of names at my named entity recognition, I realised suddenly that a lot of names are used in dozens of different places in the country. So when this name pops up, how do you know which one it's pointing to? Plenty of other names are names of people. So do you know, is it talking about a person, or is it talking about a place? So I had to go through and carefully curate my list of names to sort of disambiguate it. That's just one example. The Factiva example is another. Sometimes giving text to computers brings in a lot of extra work of processing the text. So it's best to say, use these tools because they can give you different sorts of answers rather than to save you time. That's it. I've got a blog where I try to show what I'm doing, although sometimes I prefer to just do it rather than write about it. That's at that first address, and for something completely different, I have another blog that talks about local history, if that's your thing. So, thank you.
We have got time for questions, and pizzas are on their way. So, Angus, questions? Anyone? Oh, take one.
I had a question. So this was really showed that this sort of technique is a really useful way of, I guess, confirming lots of things that you know. If you followed CSG, you're going to know a lot about that, and that all tallied up, and so it shows that it's a really valuable resource. Did you find any insights that you weren't expecting, or did you sort of look to use it as a way to draw out things that you weren't aware of?
That's sort of the key question that I have in doing this research. And I'm sort of not quite there yet. This is just literally some of the first outputs I've found from the model. I've only just started getting this together. But certainly the answer, more so with the geographic information, like I didn't know that CSG was talked about in a lot of these areas, but it brought these clusters together, which showed me, oh, it is talked about there and there and there. That certainly opened my eyes up. I didn't know a lot of that. Can't think of any examples of specific topics that surprised me, but certainly being able to see when they peak over time, that's the sort of thing you can't predict, or you might have a hunch for, but you can often surprise yourself by seeing what really happened. But no, I'm absolutely interested in that question as to can you learn new things as opposed to confirming what you already know? Because if it only does the latter, it's not as useful as it could be. Yeah.
And that's fascinating stuff. You used Factiva. Does your data, the data you gathered, does that enable you to measure the way in which different media organisations report this issue? So, for example, can you differentiate between, say, Fairfax and News Limited?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm aiming to do with this, because yeah, you can compare the prominence of a topic for one organisation versus the other. You could look at which topics relate or co-occur with each other in one organisation versus another. With the place names, I've already experimented with this on my blog. I've shown which you can say, does this newspaper talk about this place more than that newspaper? So, at one level, yes, you certainly can. How useful it is and what it can actually tell you is basically the topic of my thesis, yes. We've lost our MC.
What was the turnaround period for doing that data analysis you did from the start of it to the finish of it? Was it a quick thing or was it quite a...
When you say start to finish, you mean literally everything I've shown you, or?
Yeah, so like gathering it from Factiva to finishing those graphs.
I can't really give a fair answer because I haven't done it in a linear fashion, and I've done it while learning how to do it at the same time. So, I mean, literally that came together over a period of months. If I was to do it again, starting tomorrow, it took me several days just to get the Factiva data downloaded and in place. If you were using another data source that was more accessible, you'd save that time. If someone said I wanted a graph of the topics in that thing, I'd probably ask for a few days to a week from scratch, yeah. The actual model itself, when you run it, doesn't take all that long. But yeah, preparing the data is the big time killer. Someone else at the back had a hand up. No?
I was wondering though, as you were saying, it's a bit of black magic because you've got to fit an algorithm to get what is notionally an outcome that you might be expecting. This sort of goes to that question about your expectations. These kinds of meta-analysis is just like you're analysing somebody else's analysis. Effectively, that's what the news stories are, that somebody else has applied their analysis.
Sure, yep.
And so you're going by count, I guess, or frequency, as you're suggesting. But I would imagine that the original question about cross-correspondence between different data sets might be really more concrete sort of results to pop up. Because a lot of those stats that you're talking about were occurrences within articles. You know what I mean? So they're not necessarily a separate data set that would support your conclusions.
Yeah, I think one important thing is to find actual hard data to compare this against. One example is the CSG well development itself. How many CSG wells were being drilled on over time? What was happening on the ground? But yeah, before your data comes from the news, it's kind of a closed loop, isn't it? Which is again partly what I'm keen to do is compare the content of the news versus the content of websites and press releases from the campaign groups themselves to see, is there a different story going on? Is one group's story getting picked up while the other's being ignored, and so forth? But yeah, you've got to be very careful to qualify what it is you're analysing. I agree. And this is just news that I'm analysing, it's not reality.
And it's certainly worth pointing out that news isn't the only trove of big data. As Panama Papers tell us last week, whenever it was, and then Hillary Clinton's email dump is another one I like citing, which is a really interesting piece of text.
I was just wondering, how many articles did you actually go in and read after this? Because like, I can see that there's a job like the quantitative, getting the words given to teams, but how much of the qualitative content analysis did you do as well to ensure that it was what you're reading?
Probably more than I'm giving away, in that basically what I'd do when I'd see an interesting feature in the data and say, what's happening there? The data that comes out of the topic model allows you to sort your articles by strength of a certain topic. So I'd say, okay, there's a peak in topic X here. what are the articles that were strongest in topic X there, and I'd read them and then see, oh, I see what's going on here. So, yeah, in almost every case, I validated to check. This is a problematic example too, because I came to this already knowing a lot about what happened. Not everything, but a bit. So it's easy for me to think I'm learning something new when maybe I'm not. You know? But yeah, and one thing it does, it gives you a way to target your reading. That's something I found. Yeah.
You said that you disambiguated the place names.
Ah.
How did you do that then?
Not very intelligently. Basically, this is where the algorithm approach, I think, would have done a lot better job. Or a combination of dictionary and algorithm or machine learning. I'd go through and I'd say, oh, there are 2 Taras in Australia. Which one is it likely to be talking about? I'll look at a few examples, and if the first 4 out of 5 are all talking about a particular place, I might say, I'm pretty confident it's talking about this one, so I'll assign it to that location. If I couldn't tell, I'd just delete it and remove it from the list. It occurred to me that if you had an algorithm that could, basically the way I did it was to say what places are nearby. You know, it's talking about this location, and the locations around it in the text are all in Queensland. It's probably talking about this one. I've no doubt that a machine learning or algorithm could do the same thing, and probably already does. So if you want to get serious, you could be much more intelligent about it than I was. Yeah.
So, I mean, you made that point about this is something that you were familiar with. Did you have any thoughts then about, say, how you would approach the next thesis, maybe a data set that you're not familiar with, using the similar techniques, I guess, but sort of where you're not sure what you'd be getting out of it?
Not as yet. Although I must say my experience with this issue is in Queensland. And while I'm doing this, I'm learning a hell of a lot about what's gone down in the other states. So in a sense, that is unfamiliar to me, and it'll be a bit of a test as to how quickly I can pick that up. And I've already learned a lot about it in that sense. I haven't thought about which issue I'll do next, if that's what you're asking. Open to suggestions, but you have to wait a few years. Pizza?
I'll offer just one closing thought,
Yep.
and then I think we'll break for pizza, and then I think we're going to come back together after a bit of a break, just for a bit more of a discussion about some other tools that sit within this realm, particularly for those who might have been a little bit bamboozled about some of the high tech there. What is some of the things that make this a little bit more approachable as well. But yeah, one closing thought on that issue of how much you know of the topic and how much you don't. I've got a lot of experience using these technologies, and at the moment got about 212 students using Lexham Answer for an assignment where they're using Factiva and other tools to scrape data and do that kind of analysis. And I do find it interesting when you look at a topic you don't necessarily have a lot of understanding or experience within. These tools in particular make it very easy to actually get a quick read on the lay of the land. I treat them almost like when you arrive, you think about travelling to a distant city, you arrive in the city and you pull out that map and you're kind of like, all right, there's the general kind of layout, there's Old Town, there's the kind of shopping precinct, there's, we're interested in food and stuff like that. You kind of get that lay of the land on it. It doesn't give you the details about at the street level where every little interesting thing is, but it gives you that broad overview. These tools are incredibly useful for that. So yeah, they're not going to give you that sharp insight, but I think they'll give you a fair good read on what are the general gists around the topic, protest and economics and business, right? That's not going to give you that real key insight, like who were the major players, what was really kind of going down, but it gives you an idea about broadly what was going on. So thank you very much again, Angus.
Thank you.
Pizza's like, there is a gluten-free pizza at the front right, and there is a vegan pizza at the back right. So if you're that way inclined, we have catered for you.
Oh, of course, yeah. Yeah, like it's sitting for 3 years, even though it's really old and Well, I'll probably. I hear that. Run out to not getting income to work though. Very trendy fellow. What? I think that'll be weird.
Yeah.
amazing though. I didn't know that.
I
gotta know what are these like? What are they worth to start with? Like, they can't be cheap, but surely. Given they're just
I don't know what they're worth, but somebody, Tim will know, who's up the back next. Tim, wave at me. That's Tim.
Is he in your team?
Tim is, yes.
Tim's on your team, right?
Yes, yes.
You guys are doing black.
And Colin next to him as well in the black. No, Matthew's not here tonight, unfortunately. Next to Jess Stewart. Yeah, okay, yeah. We've met for the first time last night. She's going to famous, right? Sorry, I just I believe we are related, but I can't tell you off the top of my head how.
My dad would drive the name is
I'm not going to claim to be part of the famous tribe. There aren't too many. Yeah, grew up in where I think kind of the generation started right. Yes, so I think they're the same generation there. Yeah, well, they were keen countries. There's an Ellery's Road which was in their farm. Yeah, no worries, yeah.
Yeah. so much time. I'm like, how do you even have it? I do not gonna lie, I actually use it as my prep like when I didn't want to do other assignments, I would get it. I'll just like everyone else I'll just seal it up and send it to them and be like, hey, if you want to pay me, it'd be great. Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. As I said, I'm going to put that on my resume now, like the actual resume. Oh, I do that. I think I send it over to me, so I'm not getting the secretary. But I mean, obviously, I'm going to now be working on I'm very like, this is like a photo tree, in, those kind of things. That's fine, it's all, but just to feel more how you would apply this week. So, I mean, we're meant to be talk about the real but even it was something else I don't talk about that. So I think, yeah, you know, can you do something? Yeah, two good business, actually interacting with people. I had the work. Yeah, no, I had two. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So just like two people. Yeah, so I work weekends. Yeah. I think it's also actually the latest this one, it is interesting, but data, well, we've got a manager, so that yeah, so something like it, yeah, so I think something that networking, even though it's it actually is quite where do you have to have time to do these are so we have a that's a real 3-day casual, so that's why I created Jack's Office Network and events, and that was them, like they do this, it's really hard so I try and sometimes I'd say that and like Jack would share the I didn't do that. Really? Actually sounds really interesting. And did you get them wrong? Yeah. No, that sounds so beautiful. Yeah. I was like, I feel like it's really good. I thought it's real when you just say like the customer, I was talking about
Should we? Yeah, should we? What was the one that Angus used?
Knine. K-N-I-N-E.
Oops. DuckDuckGo does that to me every time.
What are you using DuckDuckGo?
Why not? Try something different.
Oh, you're such a goddamn hipster. So awesome. I love it. Just the anti-Google. Capiche. K-A-P-I-C-H-E. Yep. That's another Brisbane-based one.
All
Like
right.
the hub for goddamn text analytics.
Yeah. How did that happen?
They're ex
Yeah.
Yeah, one Chris design discursus. Ah, that's another one. Discursus, that's mine.
Have you got a website?
Yeah.
DICURSIS.
yeah.
Oh man, this live stream is working my CPU pretty hard. I tell you
Oh
what.
yeah. Is it still on?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Just going out to the public.
Yeah. Why not?
There's a whole bunch of other lexical ones, but I think they're less interesting.
I've forgotten the.
What are you doing? You gotta log in for.
There's some code I need for to. I was just going to play with my neural network just for the fun of it. I've crashed my editor now as well because I've tried to open 10 years of Hansard like an idiot. anyone's keen to have a chat about some more tools, might have a go at that now. You don't have to participate, but you know, if you're interested. Let's start with Kanine. Tell us about Kanine. Dan told me it was amazing. I've never played with it.
I've never met someone else who knows about it.
Yeah, right.
But I just stumbled across it when I was searching for things to do text analysis.
Yeah.
So yeah, Kanine, Eclipse. So anyone who's done any development in the Eclipse platform will know the look and feel of this really well. So basically, Kanine, as Angus explained, it's open, free to use, free to download. All the projects you create are able to be saved and shared around with other people. It compartmentalizes all the data as well. So you have data objects, obviously, as your input files, and so everything's kind of compartmentalized there. So when you create a project, you've got your data files, it's all kind of laid out separately.
Are the modules kind of specific to a data format?
Yeah, it's got binding, so...
Maybe, but there's a bunch of very generic modules that are just like filter modules, joining modules, basic data manipulation. There's a bunch that are task specific. I think it was actually developed as pharmacology or something. So there's a bunch of things that are just specific to analysing molecules and proteins and stuff. There's others that do just basic sort of stats and things. It's a whole text processing, but there's graphic outputs as well. There's then integration modules that you can hook it up to other databases or hook it up to R even. You can connect to an R server and get a table from R and then spin out R tables. It's pretty impressive range of things that it does.
If you were to rate the learning curve from 1 to 10, 10 being the biggest,
10 being what?
10 being like
something you
learning
haven't achieved.
Photoshop. Where would you put it?
I mean, it depends where you come from, because there's the learning curve mostly, you're not learning how to use the program, it's learning how people manipulate data.
Yeah.
So it's like, they use filters, they use group, but it's only not
Yeah.
logic, that's the hard to.
And also, one of the things with Kanine, it's not going to solve your data cleaning problem for you either, right? There's like none of these tools, I think, unless you've brought something in that's amazing, like solves that.
Someone needs to do that.
No, it's a completely unglamorous space though, right? That
But you can use it to do it though. You can use it to construct workflow.
Wrangler.
yeah, Wrangler is meant to fix this to a degree, yeah.
So did you use this for both the entity extraction and for the topic modeling, or?
The topic models for mine did come from R, but I could have done the same thing. Yeah, R's got a bunch of topic models.
Okay.
So it seems to be the most active ecosystem.
That's interesting.
Nime has a LDA thing, but it's pretty basic. You can't do much.
Yeah.
But it works a hell of a lot faster than I does because Nime natively does multi-link processing.
Right.
Whereas I don't know how to do that nowadays.
Yeah,
right.
You've got to manually tell it to do it, whereas this is one code model.
Yeah. Okay.
So I crunched that 26,000 manual thing in 10 or 15 minutes.
Right.
Whereas doing that in a couple of hours,
Yeah.
I'm sure it took about 5 hours.
Yeah. Okay.
It's, yes.
So yeah, Leximancer is a commercial product. It gives you, I guess, a whole bunch of features when it comes to putting text in.
Get the Avid quiz up as well. I'm
Oh
sure
yeah,
The Avid.
I can totally find
I
it.
typed Avid quiz and it just didn't come up.
I've tried that as well. I think it's
I typed Avid election quiz. It didn't
PM language maybe.
Oh. I tried Googling it, that didn't find it actually.
Well, let's try DuckDuckGo.
Go, my goodness, there.
Oh, it's
There it is. It's first result.
First hit! Woo! DuckDuckGo, you win! He wins the internet.
What is it? Seriously?
What is it?
It's like a privacy-aware search engine, so it doesn't record anything.
Doesn't
about
track you,
It
doesn't- yeah.
track-
Why is it always better than Google did? I searched almost that exact same.
Google doesn't.
Because Google doesn't think you need to know about it, Angus.
Yeah, exactly. It gets you out of the filter bubble. That's what DuckDuckGo does.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, so this one was one that Simon did. I had some input into. and Matt and others. But yeah, let's start the quiz. Did Tony Abbott talk more about the budget before the election or after the election? All right.
Before. Because after it proves that he didn't have
Did Tony Abbott talk more about taxes before the election or after the election?
Which election was this anyway?
The one where Tony Abbott came to... Yeah. Yeah. Not the one where he was ousted.
Constantly, both before.
And after. After.
Has Tony Abbott ever talked about international trade?
Let's go after.
G20, remember? He was on like after the election.
Oh.
Before.
No,
Because he would have said that Labor Day.
Cheers, Lydia.
Standing orders.
Madam Chair, I move to suspend standing orders. Before. Sorry. I know the answers. Who would have thought?
I don't even remember the answers.
No, after, because that's aspirational.
No, you always say we're going to have a surplus if we get it.
If we get it.
Before or after?
True, or before a budget. Yeah. Okay, so
Anyway,
after.
You want to go after?
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, obviously.
After, because you spoke about that.
The carbon.
No, yeah.
Co-payments.
Oh.
Yeah, sprung that one on us, didn't he? Oh, by the way.
I'm guessing before. It sounds good for making campaign.
Yeah, okay, try and never.
Probably after.
Sure?
If at all.
I'm saying.
Fine. Before.
You went strangely silent on this issue after the election. Yeah, after?
Depends whether to talk about proactively or reactively.
See, I'd say before. If it was up to me.
Oh, okay, before then.
Because you got to think about, did he talk about it, or did his education minister Christopher Pyne mention more about that?
Yeah, but that was an unpopular thing they did, I thought. So it was after.
The PM palms off all the unpopular things to ministers.
Yeah. Jobs. Carbon tax. Carbon tax. Oh, 71%, not bad. 17% better than average. Right? Yeah, budget was actually after. Right? Now, taxes, you got that. Asylum seeker, before the election, man. You're not yet. Yeah, that's it, right? Debt. Labor's debt that they left it with, right? Blah, 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 right? Yeah. Surplus will create the surplus, right? Yeah. Yeah. Infrastructure. But yeah, no, on the universities, if we look at the universities one.
How did you quantify this more or less?
We did the text analysis. Confused about your results? Have a look here, right?
Okay. I know, but I want to know exactly like in what way was it, like frame it. I want to know the frame as well as the
Yeah. So no, let's look at universities because that's a good one. On universities. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So I would say that Tony Abbott made mention of universities and their value to society pre-election. However, has gone largely quiet on this issue since coming to power. That is exactly what I would say on that. And some of the change might be because comment on the issue has been left to front benchers Christopher Pyne and Ian McFarlane. That's what I would say on the issue.
Scroll to the top, but when were you introduced into this? How were you, when did Stan Angus come into it?
Said Dr. Daniel Angus.
There you go.
Okay. Right.
Yeah, done. All right. No, so yeah. Lexmancer is, we've discussed, it allows you to put in text in a variety of formats, PDF, plain text, CSV, any of that, and turn it into that kind of insight, and allows you to do a lot of quantity analysis. Capiche. This is really cool, actually. There is a demo, yeah. Oh, do you want to link up an account? We don't necessarily need to do it. I can explain it. Without doing that. The reason it looks a lot like Lexmancer is because
that you can have in different arrangements.
Yes.
It's not just one word.
But it's a word cloud generated from actual topics. It's not just random like colouring of words and stuff. And it's more than just term frequency. Yeah. So the story behind this one is a couple of the ex-Lexmancer developers started a startup, and it's Capiche. And this is Ryan and Chris, and others. They use different technology to Lexmancer, so they're using another kind of topic model. It's the chi-squared topic model, and what they do is they've got this kind of engine behind it, a bunch of different visualizations. It's using a lot of D3 in this as well, I think. So, pretty cool actually. They're using a lot of this, like deploying wise, a lot of people are using this for consumer intelligence and stuff. So looking at brands and that kind of thing.
I thought it might be worth having a look at. I mean, I know one that's popular with journalists is this overview docs.
Oh yeah, cool.
Which I first came across it about a year or so ago, and I thought it was pretty bare bones, which it was, and I think it's definitely slowly getting better. One of the great advantages of it is you can upload non-OCR'd PDFs and it OCRs them for you, which is kind of handy.
You know Google does that. You can do that in Google Drive as well.
Yeah, I did know that. Yeah. It is getting easier and easier to do that. Not that I'm aware of. So I've really just played with this. I haven't actually used it in any serious way. But this was at the same time we were doing that language quiz. I threw the same data set into overview docs just to see what it would do for us. And it's been ages since I looked at this, so let's see what happens. It's a bit slow as well because they're a bare bones startup. It was actually written by a bunch of journalists, just because they needed this technology. It does this kind of word cloud thing. I find when you get the more interesting stuff is the search or the tree stuff. But one thing that's really good is it lets you kind of from here, it spits out a bunch of computer generated stuff and then lets you start tagging things so you can start to kind of organize your data within the system as well. This experimental entity cloud, I don't know how good it is at entities.
That's the thing, I know a lot of the tools like Lexmancer in particular, it's not a document management tool.
Yeah.
It's for when you've got all your data ready to analyze, you jam it into the system and then you run it.
Yeah, this doesn't really help you either, but it would be really useful to have something like that. Yeah.
It was more document aware and it's that would be any good because
I remember trying to kind of validate all the data, like looking through the PDF that it spit out and like trying to find the name of the document and then going back to the text file and then that experiment is good.
Yeah, it's like your data narratives and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can, oh, it doesn't do anything, but then you can just sort it out.
Yeah. Yeah. Lexmancy can do it, but Lexmancy yeah, Lexmancy can do it, but it's
Well, you got to get the outputs and do
fun.
things to them and do more things to them.
So in terms of that document aware thing, I actually think this tree diagram is really useful. So it basically takes a chunk of, I don't know whether they're concepts or like word tags, but then you can drill down and it filters the document list on the right.
Benefits of SEO is that
So if you, whoa. I don't know why it's grouped Qantas and co-payment, but there you go. I assume they're like, I assume it's like term frequency, document frequency, or something like that, I'd say.
and you just read it
You wouldn't have any idea, you could never figure out why those two things are increasing. Maybe you don't.
Yeah.
But then you can start make conjectures about it.
Say,
So,
so for example, I put I put in a bunch of German language and French, so the newspaper documents into Lexmancer and generated maps. I knew enough what was rubbish in terms of like stuff that probably looked a bit out of place and what was relevant.
So I don't know what it's
Because of the association, right? I knew enough. I didn't know how to interpret it, but I knew what was like what concepts were mean, like were artifacts of the data being missing and stuff like that. So I was able to get rid of those, come with something that was somewhat meaningful, and give it to a French speaker and say, okay, here's the data. Can you make more sense of it? And they're like, oh yeah, that means that. That means that.
when you apply for
that.
a job,
It's fine,
it's
right?
to know everything because
Yeah.
so many areas you
But
change.
how did you identify what the artifacts
It's not a big deal. About do you know the big
Because
things.
they don't look like, they don't cluster with everything else in a natural way. But when you come up with one of these maps, like this, like what?
There's a good measures of, like in topic modeling, this way of quantifying those topic areas. So we look at the words tools.
You guys working, are you?
This is phase 2.
This is phase, I missed much of phase 2.
No, we're just having a play with some tools to try and kind of contextualize the whole idea into a more kind of usable process, I guess.
So it takes you a little more text too,
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I don't know what parts of the tree are drilled down to on there, but if you're playing with it, then you can sort of get a real good idea about how the topics are coming from broad to narrow, and then you know that this press gallery is in kind of the context of all the topics further up the tree, and there might be a text gallery in another part of the tree. Press gallery in another part of the tree, but it might have a different context, which I find kind of interesting. And then it filters the list. So there's only 11 documents in that. I don't know how many there were, but there were quite a few that kind of match that part of the tree. So it's like I said, it's fun to play with, and I haven't really used it in like a proper. It is the asset test. But on the other hand, I know that plenty of journalists have used it in that kind of way that was really useful and generated stories out of it.
So, are you guys across what Dan did with Steve in the last federal election? With Steve Austin?
I don't know, maybe.
Talking about that, like we did. So I used Lexmancer during the last Fed to actually profile all the candidates.
Okay.
Like all the text that are defined on the candidates that you sort of see.
Yeah.
And then come up with the emerging concepts that they're promoted, like self-promoted, right? So from their own website, from their own Facebook page, from their own Twitter account, any text that they put out there, basically authored or authorized, or their party will put out on their behalf, to kind of look at that level, how are they promoting themselves?
Yeah.
What are they using to frame their kind of, identity within the campaign?
Yeah.
So that's one way, getting
But what we did then was that Dan would give that to Steve, and Dan would talk to Steve, and then Steve would have a candidate for him, and he'd have the candidate. So Steve would have Dan's analysis informing his questions to the candidate.
Use that to kind of throw everything. So you put yourself forward as someone that's about families.
Yeah.
What do you say to that? Like, you know, using their own text to kind of inform their, you know, this is how you put yourself forward.
Yeah, that's really useful. Yeah.
He actually said to me about 6 months ago, have you guys got any ideas about what we should do, what he should do for the forthcoming federal election? Now, I haven't got back to him on that, but I don't know whether, I mean, do you guys insert yourselves into local radio at all?
I'm not directly, but we talk to them about a variety of things and try and work with them on projects that are appropriate. Vote Compass is a great example. And one of the others that we haven't locked down yet as a project for this election, but one we'd like to work with the Open Australia Foundation on. They've got a website called electionleaflets.org, where it's essentially a crowdsourcing effort to get images and kind of some metadata around all election leaflets from all the electorates. And so we'd like to do something with them, and that would be a kind of ideally a cross promotion across a bunch of different media, you know.
So definitely running with Vote Compass in the next election.
Yeah, we're definitely running Vote Compass.
Well, the current election.
Yes. That's
what we've been promised.
Yep, that will be a delivered promise.
I don't know how I get the conversation. We spend a lot of effort, and you may not be aware of that, but in the first part of the course that Dan and I teach, I did a fair bit of stuff on Vote Compass. I mean, they had to watch a lot of it, and they had to go and around in it. So
it's a great source of data for us, and the collaboration's worked really well. We've also been talking to a few social media companies, but Facebook in particular has been quite actively pushing their kind of analysis of Facebook election-based stuff. But in our chats with them, we've felt a bit iffy about their data, and they sort of haven't been able to answer adequately kind of our
That was an interesting one. I don't know if this is open up a can of worms, Simon, but I read an article last week about Facebook. Some people having a conversation about the whole Trump issue, right?
Right.
And you know, Facebook, they've got control of the algorithm, right? They can decide what gets on that front page, what gets feeds or not. And they've got so much power now as a media. You've got to think of them as a media platform, right?
Yeah.
And there's not the same checks and balances that you have with the traditional fourth estate.
Yeah. So that's an interesting point. Like one of the data that they were pushing was about interactions with pieces of content. So it was essentially an aggregation of likes, views, and shares, or something like that. And so their contention would be that it's all user generated, and that these all emanate from kind of either the politicians directly promoting themselves on Facebook, or users kind of sharing other media. But you know, the point that they control the algorithm is really important, and it's one of the reasons we're kind of a bit iffy about the data. And
presumably Ross Perot would be a current US, boss if it was just purely done on Facebook algorithms and because Ross Perot got an awful lot of that last time.
Right.
And I wonder whether there is a kind of a self, the types of people who are more likely to like or to share things are not necessarily the same as the types of people who will vote.
Yeah, totally. And so one of the questions I asked them when we were talking to them was, how do we normalise this for a representative sample of the population? And they I mean, I don't know whether I asked the question badly or they just didn't have a good answer for it, but we didn't get a good answer.
Well, they may not have understood the question.
Well, no, I mean, I think that's probably not true. I mean, they've obviously got people who are very clued in. They're not stupid. And the other question I've had a few times when talking with social media companies about data they've got is whether I'm talking with a sales rep or whether I'm talking with
It's an incredible. I don't think you want to. It's an amazing data set that Facebook offers.
Totally,
like,
yeah.
You know, something like
And
6 million people. You can normalise that so easily, and there's no. And I'm sure they have all the tools to do it. The question is, that's merging into their condition.
yeah, and they didn't offer us the demographic data around each of those points, which would allow us to do something like that, and nor did they assert
Which you do
that
get
it
with
was
vote compass.
Which we do, yeah, we
Which is
do.
very
Yeah.
valuable, I think, in vote
Yeah.
compass.
Yeah.
Well, okay, well, let's more on that then. That's interesting. Gavin Morris, when Gavin Morris was up last year, he said to me that he believes that the Commonwealth Games, we were talking about the future, and he said the Commonwealth Games, he expects that the ABC will have Facebook pages for specific events and for specific competitors, and there'll be a whole raft of Facebook pages around it's 2018, a whole raft of Facebook pages. So there'll be one for Greco-Roman wrestling and one for Sally Pearson, and
Which more likely to be Facebook Live video rather than that that's
Is it
right on their page.
Facebook.
he used the word page, but
That's
that's
right.
sort of
Yeah.
So
yeah.
that's their. I feel that we would never get a look in.
There's also a question of, I guess, with the way media organisations, some are going second screen now at the moment when it comes to amazing things you can do when you don't even have a live broadcast rights. So how you actually go about. So you think about I guess bring it back to given one of the great examples of the ABC here, that grandstand, right? You listen to it, and there's a couple of dudes watching cricket and calling it as they watch it, but you've got the same thing happening in different parts of the world. Like we had a speaker in Sweden who was talking about second screen over there, where you've got people who are basically sitting in front of a webcam watching soccer, the World Cup, commenting on it and talking amongst themselves. And this draws an audience. People not actually they've got the soccer on their one TV, and then they've got these people sitting there calling the game or that, and they're tweeting at those people there and interacting.
I'm afraid I worked for a broadcaster in the UK who ended up changing their basement was completely empty, just full of old equipment that they'd thrown away, and so they put lots of booths into their basement, and they now offer as a service globally, and it's broadcast in New Zealand, I think, 6 different languages, Premier League commentary of every single game, and they're doing it just off tube. They're doing it, that's a very old-fashioned word, off tube. But you know what I mean. And they are literally sitting there, and they've got an effects feed that they can watch it, and they've got you've got the Chinese guy in Mandarin doing some amazing stuff, whereas the Portuguese guy is going absolutely nuts when the girls go in, and the English guy is saying, "Oh, I think there's been a girl."
So it's culturally
absolutely, it is
contextual.
and it is absolutely fascinating, but they're not there, of course. And the other thing which is really interesting is that you don't, the editors don't necessarily need to know the language in order to edit down the goal highlights, because the way that they do the goal is as soon as a goal happens, the commentator leans forward and presses the big "there's been a goal" button, and there's been a goal button is then a little data pulse, which then means that the one editor that they have for these 20 different services, the one editor is busy going, "Okay, there's been a goal, I will edit from there to there," and pretty well automatically ends up doing it. It's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. It ended up winning a Queen's Award last week. So yeah.
But you don't even need that metadata, really. I mean, you could do that based on crowd noise, and you could do that based on
It was time code as well.
right.
Do you know what? I saw there's a Spanish company which monitors the volume control of your mobile phone. So when you're listening to the live stream on your mobile phone, it monitors the volume control. That is amazing data. And they showed how that works in terms of a football match, where the volume control
Stop
goes
the boats
up when there's a goal, because people want to hear it, and the volume control goes down during the commercial breaks, and the volume control goes up in the middle of news broadcasting as well. The volume control goes up when there's something interesting happening. And it's absolutely fascinating. It's such an amazing set of data just looking at the volume control. And the only way that you can really see it is on mobile phones, because then you've got that direct link back to what was actually getting broadcast at the time. It's absolutely
And as a
fascinating.
researcher in Singapore did something similar with the vibration data on a mobile phone, and she can tell with, I think it was about 98% of accuracy, whether it's a man or a woman who owns the phone, right?
Really?
Just because because men tend to have their phone in their pocket, and women tend to have it in a bag or some other one, and you can actually determine it based on that. But it's like broader shakes basically than but yeah, that kind of like what you do with that extra data.
I had to play with Tony Abbott.
Sorry, we took it off topic.
No, it's not off topic at all. I just thought I'd bring this up since we were talking about finding when to make the cuts. There's this little there's this nice little Python script I found a couple of years ago, and it was designed to make automatic supercuts. Have you seen those videos where they like cut a movie where they only show all instances of like one word that's said throughout the entire movie or something like that? And so I ran it over Tony Abbott's YouTube channel, which isn't perfect because it's automatically captioned by YouTube, so it's speech recognition captioned, and so this is based on the closed captions, but it gets pretty nauseating. This is him every time he says boat.
This progress in stopping the boats, to stop the boats, to abolish the big new taxes, to get the budget of their skin. In similar vein, stopping the boats and getting the budget back into the black. The boats are still coming. We've had something like 1,600 illegal, and I'm proposing 2 further debates.
A mudslinging competition. I mean, you both say that you won't go.
We have to be prepared to turn boats around.
Anyway, it goes on and on and on. And there's even more nauseating ones. What have I got? I forget which, but some of them are just like, there's one that's about 12 minutes long, and I listen to the whole thing like a fool. But yeah, it's kind of fun to...
What's the tool, Simon? What's it called?
It's called Supercuts something or other. Let me have a look for it.
And what you can do is you can extend the time around the mention of the word. Is that the idea here?
Yeah. So if you've looked at a closed captions file, it's essentially a timestamp and a piece of text, and it just finds the timestamp associated. It's a start and finish timestamp. Finds a timestamp associated with a piece of text that has the words in it. It's just like a grep function, basically, and then just processes the video and cuts it into place.
So you could reprocess that to do tighter editing and stuff like that.
Yeah, I saw a fascinating thing in Vegas last week where they were running speech to text through it, and what they could even do is, if you wanted to, you could take that clip, or indeed any clips, you could say, right, any mention of the word boat, bleep that out. And it would do that, and it would even, so you'd hear the beginning of the plosive of the B, and then you'd hear just the S of or the S sound of t or s at the end, and everything else would be bleeped, and it was absolutely fascinating, completely automatic, done by a company that was doing this for radio stations where you could just, the other thing that they would do is you could grab the text, and just by highlighting text as you would in a word processor, you were editing the audio, and it worked flawlessly.
Makes a dump button available.
Yeah, exactly.
So were you at the National
I think that's it. I can't remember whether that's the one I use, but it's something like that.
Oh wow, yeah.
It's just
People would have, So we could just put in like, any 3-word slogan, right? And say,
replace it with something else, which would be even more funny.
Yeah, it's like the Abbots with cats, right? That plugin. There was it was a Chrome plugin, I think, or
Yeah.
it's a Chrome plugin, yeah. And any image of Tony Abbott was replaced with cats.
Baby pictures with something else. That was fantastic. Get rid of that.
Yeah, cat pictures.
We all need to go on.
See,
Really good in touch. Cheers. Good one.
So, anybody else got tools they love for doing this text analysis? I found.
I'm interested in if you've got anything that can crawl a website and pull all the text out of it.
Well, if you just want to pull all the text out of it, I'd just use something like wget and then just run it through a HTML parser and strip the tags.
Import IO.
Yeah, so in the next month, in April, we're gonna do the session's going to be on scraping. Import.io is pretty good at like point and click scraping, and it's getting better and better all the time. So I definitely recommend having a play with that.
It's good for table data. So if you've got something like, so for example,
Yeah.
if you've got like real estate data or something where it's consistently always formatted, you know, like you think about every ad being with a price and a postcode and this, and you want to actually split the data apart into a table with categories. That's what I find Import.io is good for, is for actually splitting data apart into various categories, but otherwise, there's better ones.
I've been using it to scrape all the CSG campaigners website, for example.
Yeah.
And they've all got like a newsfeed role thing in it.
How do you give it that website to call?
You point to the website,
Okay,
you
just have to
say
say that one.
you say that's the date, that's the content, that's the title.
Go for it.
So I want to create something that'll do that for search results from Google. And just get
Google's going to cause you trouble.
They're not going to like that. But there's got to be a way to do it.
It is harder than you expect because they're very good at spotting when somebody's doing that.
I expect it to be quite hard.
So even with tools like Import.io like that like Import.io are kind of good net citizens in the sense that they'll send like a user agent down the line to Google, and Google knows Import.io's user agent, so you won't be able to scrape Google using Import. But if you want to get really I was going to bring up a model of mine, but I've forgotten my login. If you want to get into Google, you'll have to do your own. Like you'll have to run probably a virtual machine and give it a specific user agent and maybe even change it up with every few requests, just so you're not detected. It's pretty
What
hard.
you're saying is find a first year to search those and give me the websites to point to.
It's actually like, it's one of those things that could lend itself to a bit of crowdsource, depending on what it is, or some kind of like Mechanical Turk approach.
Or the Google knowledge graph is worth having a look at, which used to be tree based, and is now the Google knowledge graph. At least from a topic point of view, you can do some quite useful things with that. So
I've used it before. I guess what I want to do is I want to do something similar to what you've done here, but around certain, the top 10 Google results around topics, and then see map how the Google sees them to be connected.
Yeah.
So that I can game the system, to be honest. Given that that's how it ranks everything now, so.
Yeah.
So knowledge graph for that is probably not the best.
Probably not.
The application,
Yeah. So no, I mean that's why it's so hard, is because every SEO out there
wants to
trying
do
do
exactly
that.
this.
Naturally, right? And I guess that's when it comes back to like what we're doing in academia, this is what makes it incredibly difficult, is that when it comes to the web and it comes to any of these social media sites or any of these kinds of places, getting the data out of it is just so difficult. Even if your intentions are noble, right? It is so difficult to get the data out in a clean, easily readable and usable format. It's what always the limit is. They treat us all the same.
Do any of the companies make like concessions to academics, or is there any interest in that, or not really?
Not really. I mean, there's some, like, the ones I know of are kind of go, oh yeah, you know, you're such and such, and so therefore you're in the club, and we'll let you in here, and you can do some things. And they rock up to the conference, and they've got this amazing data, and they've got this amazing insights that no one else can get because they don't have access to that data.
Yeah.
Yeah, a part of the club, not Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley.
Southeast Queensland.
Yeah, you know, that's it. Yeah.
Same.
We're just going to make like a Google killer and a, you know, our own kind of Facebook. Yeah, we'll be fine.
Probably not got something to be
Well, I'm
tomorrow.
London has a silicon roundabout, which is just as shit as it sounds.
Cool. Cheers, guys.
Okay.
See you later.
Thank you.
Cheers.
So that's
Oh, yeah, cool.
That's all Australian cricketers, Australian male cricketers, I should qualify, since the beginning of time, in theory.
Where did you get that from? Cricket Australia?
ESPN, I think I scraped that one from. Cricinfo,
Cricinfo.
yeah, which is owned by ESPN now. But I just did that as a kind of example because I ran a lunchtime session at work to show people how to do it. But
Jeez, Shane Warne wasn't really that good at making runs, was he? The worst, but
no, not many runs, eh?
It's good at getting out.
he's good at getting people out.
Well, he wasn't a bowler. I mean,
Yeah, concession.
he had a reputation for slugging.
Yes, you're getting out by doing that.
How open is Wikipedia to this sort of thing?
Very. I mean, you can download the whole Wikipedia database.
Yeah.
So.
I've thought about that when Telstra gives you those free data days.
Yeah.
Just so I'll make you
Got
regret
it.
that.
Yeah, download it. Yeah.
Um,
Just hit every major, like, massive data set you can find.
From Reddit or something.
Yeah.
If it was me, I would have done.
Gigabytes.
I would have done the US Geological Survey's satellite imagery personally.
Yeah.
But have a look at DBpedia rather than Wikipedia, or there's another one as well. I'm busy trying to remember, because Wikipedia is fun, but you just get a dump of it's not even HTML. It's some weird thing that you've produced. And actually, yeah, what you really want is structured information.
Yeah.
And so DBpedia, just be trying to remember the other one. But you know, and again, so you end up with with all of these, what's really nice is that you end up with one ID, which you can then use in these other services. So you can actually go, okay, here's the ID for Queen the band, not the Queen. Here's the ID for Queen the band. Where else does this ID point to? And that ID might point to Music Brains. It might point to art gallery. It might point to all kinds of things. So that's actually really handy. And I find so I run a media information site, and I find the hard job with that is busy trying to link together what one particular data source calls a radio station to what another data source calls a radio station, because guess what? They probably aren't the same. And there isn't actually one 612 ABC Brisbane, there's actually two, depending on how you're listening. And all of these tiny little nuances are things that break stuff. So having a web level ID is just massively useful. So, must be at least two, if not more.
It's a little hand-side trainer.
Yeah, I'm just trying to find the command to make it spit something out, but I've forgotten what it is. I've been training a neural network for about 3 or 4 weeks on question time Hansard, just to see if it can produce me something interesting that is like fake Hansard. It does a pretty good job, but I can't remember.
What to produce answers to questions or
No, just like, here's a dump of Hansard text.
So something that sounds parliamentary.
One of my team once played around with the subtitles from
Is
the
it?
TV
But
in order to work out, well, what can we do with the subtitles on the TV? And
Yeah.
we ended up working on something that used the subtitles from the TV and did image analysis to work out when the scene changed, when a camera changed.
Right.
So that you could then watch the latest episode of, I don't know, Downton Abbey on your Kindle, because it would show you a still from that particular scene and all of the text that was said in that particular scene as one page, and you then click the page on, and it would really, really, really clever, really clever. So if you've got access to both the subtitles and the images,
You don't want to, I mean, some of these technologies, like as assistive technologies as well, amazing.
So what was that number? What was it?
So you ended up being able to, what it outputted was, if you take a typical movie, you've got all of the script, you've got all of the video, all of the images, and if you wanted to make a book out of that, if you wanted to make something that would actually work for someone who was completely deaf, then you could actually produce something which is just, you could print something out with a picture of that particular scene, so you knew where the actors were, and all of the dialogue that actually happened, on that thing. Of course, rights reasons meant that we weren't able to release it as a product. Which is always the way, isn't it? Rights reasons. But it's just a really clever way of looking at the data that you've got and actually working out what else you can actually do with it.
He's got it.
No. I need to know more than I've got there. So
Right, leave it for next
next time. All I'm doing is
train it. Give it another month, man.
yeah.
Then you'll get, you'll get Shakespeare.
I'll
It was the
check
best
how
of
long it's been
times,
up.
It was the worst of times. Thousand monkeys and 1,000 typewriters. Perfect. All right, we'll call it.
Yeah, let's call it.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.
There you go. It's been running 3 weeks, so
Wow. That's pretty awesome.
better give you back your thumb drive as well. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sure you can. At the moment.
I'm giving you a call.